Well, you know, you have to have a extraordinarily stiff fortitude, because when you are breaking a mold and creating something new, the vast majority of people, I probably would not exaggerate to say 99% of the people will say you're going to fail. They'll either say it right to your face if you're looking for investment money. They'll say it in their body language if you're trying to perhaps recruit some key people or partners to your team. Or you can just sense it. You can read it in the media, like, you know, this company's, you know, got a small chance of success. And for SiriusXM, I would say there were 99 doors that I knocked on to have investment for every one that actually came through and backed it. And people said that this technology will never work. They said even if it could work, the government would never give you these radio frequencies. And even if the government did give you these radio frequencies, Wall Street will never finance it because you'll have no customers on day one, but you'll have to spend $1 billion to get to that day one. And you know, all these kind of objections, Richard. So to be able to power through all of those objections, you've got to, as a leadership skill, I think first and foremost, you have to have extraordinary fortitude.
Got it. And so when you're marshaling those resources, you're bringing talent to the table, you're bringing the government to the table, which you know is probably no easy task. You're bringing capital to the table. Are there then guiding principles that you sort of bound the organizations you create to keep that fortitude? I mean, you have it, but then the people around you have to have it, and the people around them have to have it. So how do you move that forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, Richard. And I think that the corollary of having this kind of fortitude to change the business or industrial landscape some way, the corollary to that is honesty. Because, in other words, when you're trying to change things, nobody believes you. So your credibility is like zero. And it was a kind of a double slap in the face for me that after creating SiriusXM, that nobody believed, and then people saw, oh wow, this really does work, this really is an awesome service, people really want it. Then I tried to start United Therapeutics, and they say that, you know, we're going to develop a medicine and save people's lives. And it was just like, you know, I was like right out of school all over again. Nobody believed me. People said, you're not a doctor, you know, how can you do this? If this was possible, why wouldn't the big pharmaceutical companies do it? I mean, just, I don't bore you with the list of objections. It was, again, like 99 objections, you know, for every one person who would say, yeah, maybe you can do it. So your credibility is very, very low when you're a change agent like this. Nobody believes you. Now you've got to get a team of a tribe amongst you to support you. You need finance people, you need engineers, HR people, legal people, all of the different kind of team support you need. So honesty becomes imperative, because if you're changing your story every day to the people who work with you, then they won't believe you either. And even when they join your team, of course it's like in their mind, well, you know, this leader, Martine, whomever, has a great idea, but nobody believes her. She probably won't make it happen. So if you're changing what you say to people from day to day, if you're changing what seem to be your core values, then you know, they won't even be on your team. You'll have nobody. When we opened our headquarters building in Silver Spring, and at that time we were only around, I would say about 50 people there, and now over 1,000. And on the site that Doug Duncan kindly sold us, we had a granite wall in the lobby, and I said to the architects and the builders, let's put the corporate objectives, etch them in granite. And people said, no, Martine, you don't want to put your values and your objectives in granite because we can't get it out. In fact, the engraver who wanted the business said, Martine, once we engrave this, we can guarantee that it will last for 2 million years. So I thought that was like great. And I said, well, I don't think your values should be changing like every 5 and 10 years. I do want people to see that the values of respecting the patients and authenticity and honesty, that those should always be our values. So they're still there 20 years later, and we still live by those values. The short answer to your question is honesty.
And you've got a few million years left on
I think that honesty, I hope, will never go out of style.
Are there differences that matter from the beginning of your career as a leader to today as a leader? Are there differences that matter in how you lead?
Yeah, I think that there are. And I look at myself as a work in progress, and I try to learn every single day how to be a better person and to live a better life. So I found that the more I listened, the more I learned. And I think when I was younger, I talked more and listened less. And it's funny, you can learn, every person to me is like a library, not a book, a whole library. And they've got so much insight and knowledge. Also, each of us have this magical gut that somehow integrates all of the information around, and in almost like a translogical way gives you like a gut feeling of what the right thing to do is, or the smarter thing to do. So when I'm in meetings, I actually stop and ask each and every person in the room what their opinion is, what they think, before I say what it is that I want to do. And that's that much higher percentage of listening is something that I have changed in my leadership style over the years.
And then when you seek out other leaders, do you look for them to be as active as listeners and in those quiet moments when, I won't say it's consensus, because I don't think it's consensus building, I think it's grabbing point of views. Do you look for that in other leaders, or are there different yins and yangs that you look for as you assemble a leadership organization?
I would be a little bit nervous, Richard, if I was looking at somebody else to be a leader and they just talked constantly and didn't take into account the points of view of other members of their team. So yes, I definitely look for those same core qualities. I look for somebody that has the fortitude to stand up for their perspective and their point of view, because creating new technologies is difficult. Creating new biology is extremely difficult. I tell people all the time, people think like launching things into space is risky. It is, but making new medicines is much more risky. It's because biology, we don't really understand. We have like these laws of physics, but our understanding of the laws of biology are very, very hazy. And just in my own career, this relates to the perfect example, Richard. When I first began with United Therapeutics, there was a dogma of biology, and this is as recent as the year 2000, so pretty recently, a dogma of biology that cells only differentiate in one direction. They start as stem cells, and then they'll differentiate to be maybe like on their way to an endothelial cell or on their way to a muscle cell. Then they'll differentiate to be finally a muscle cell or endothelial cell, skin cell, what have you. Never, ever, ever. It was called the dogma because it was like nobody doubted it could go back the other way. Then, just 10 years ago, scientists discovered that you could start with a skin cell and you could turn it back into a stem cell. And then from a stem cell, redifferentiate it into any one of 20 different types of cells. And those are called inducible pluripotent stem cells, iPSC. The researchers won the Nobel Prize for that just about 7 years or so ago. So it flipped around, biology. We at United Therapeutics are now using that as the bedrock technology of organ manufacturing, where we're going to be able to say to a patient who's suffering from end-stage heart disease or liver disease or lung disease, that we'll be able to take a biopsy of any one of your cells, differentiated cells, re-differentiate it into a stem cell, and then take it back to the particular type of cell of your organ, cardiomyocytes for your heart, epithelial cells for your lung, whatever the organ is, expand them to the tens of billions of cells and be able to provide you a replacement organ that matches your DNA, wow. And therefore you will not have to take any immunosuppressants. Wow. So it's awesome. I mean, it's why I just feel I have like the best job in the world. And but to do this takes a lot of scientists and engineers, and every one of them must be a leader. And I say to everybody, even if it's you and your laboratory equipment, you are a leader, okay? And you've got to be able to have the fortitude that if you think there's a right way to scientifically execute a particular plan or to build a technology, be strong in your belief and stand up for your belief. So that fortitude is still required. Secondly, be honest. Obviously, you don't want to, obfuscate any results. You lose all credibility. It's the wrong thing to do. There are millions of people's lives that depend on us doing the right thing. So be open, honest, and transparent. It's part of why we are a LGBTQA inclusive organization at United Therapeutics. We cherish the honesty and authenticity of everybody who's in our organization. And then finally, the third thing, in addition to the fortitude and the honesty, is to be a good listener. All of us can get a completely different idea by even talking to people outside of our field. And so never think that you know all the answers. Each of us have a chance at United Therapeutics to have a kind of like a meme slide, like you see on Facebook, like a slide with some text and an image that kind of summarizes how you're feeling. And I've got one with a person standing by a cliff, and then say the people who question you are your best friends because they're telling you you might be about to step off a cliff. So listen to everybody, be open to people who challenge your authority.
So I learn something new every time I do one of these. And I just learned something absolutely fascinating. And there's lots of folks out there. We talk about going to Mars, we talk about speeding across the country. What you just said is as fascinating, if not more fascinating than any of those things.
Thanks, Richard.
So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure, my pleasure. We feel that way at UT, and it's we're just really honored now that we've got hundreds of people working on this project, and I'm absolutely convinced that we will be able to create a manufactured organ that matches the DNA of a person with an end-stage organ disease patient, transplant them, bring them back safely to health before there is the first person on Mars or racing.
So wow, okay. I was going to go somewhere now. So you talked earlier about this notion of people, saying no. And I've read some quotes from you about this notion of not only that, but usually people ask you, well, how are you going to do it if Big Pharma was going to do it? Or how are you going to do it if some other radio maker's been in the business 100 years was going to do it? David and Goliath comes to mind. Is David and Goliath kind of at the center of what drives you when you think about these sort of innovation frontiers?
I don't really think so, Richard. I actually wish I was the Goliath in all these situations. It would make it much easier to make life better for more people. What drives me is just trying to make life better for more people. I feel that I've had like an incredibly blessed life with amazing parents and family who love me for who I am, co-workers and colleagues who welcome me as I am. The great fortune to be born in the United States, the amazing fortune just to be born in the living in the 21st century, as opposed to, oh my God, if I was like, I really don't understand the nostalgia people who like, if you only go back to the 1920s, it's like, I just feel really happy, and I just want to be able to share as much of my life with others as I can. Being the David makes it difficult because we don't have as many resources as the Goliath. We can't hire as many people as the Goliath. We can't sometimes hire the caliber of the people as the Goliath. We try to turn that negative into a positive, and everything is its opposite in some way. So if you are a Goliath, you're a little bit like I forgot the name of the giant in Gulliver's Travels who was like tied down with all these little ropes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're a Goliath, you are bound by bureaucracy, and it's just part and parcel. And we fight this ourselves every day. I'm sure PNC fights it within itself. One of my great mentors was a guy who's passed away now, Renee Anselmo, was the CEO of Pan Amsat, and he had a logo which I'll clean up a little bit, which was that truth and technology will always triumph over BS and bureaucracy. And so the problem is when you are a Goliath, you are hidebound in bureaucracy. You have to be. You can't have tens of thousands of employees without having very firm and clear systems. Organizing humans is difficult, probably harder than biology. So the benefit of us being a David is that we can move quickly. But if I had to choose, I would rather have, a budget each year. Instead of being around $1 billion a year, I'd like to have a budget of $100 billion a year. I'm sure you would too.
It would not be bad, as long as I can do something with it. So you've talked about this notion of order creation as the next frontier for UT. As you look out on the landscape, and we were talking earlier about Bitcoin and some other wonderful things that are out there now, but as you look out on the landscape, what do you think is the next frontier, period? So across industry, across geography, across the world, what's the next frontier?
Yeah, that's a deep question, Richard. It would be hard for me to settle on just one, but one of the things I love most of all about our company is about at least a third of our headcount now are what I would put in the demographic of millennials. And I noticed that there's like a different mindset, that the profit motive per se is not like as much of a driving factor for this kind of rising generation, including my own kids and whatnot, as it is of doing good and doing the right thing. It's amazing to me how many people they say, I want to work in a nonprofit. And so we created within our company, our largest subunit of our company is what's called a public benefit company. It's a new type of corporate organization, was just created by the state of Delaware less than 10 years ago. So there have been corporations go in law back to like, I don't know, the 1600s or 1700s. And then there was kind of nothing other than corporations until the LLC boom arose in the middle of the 20th century, and like lawyers and doctors and accountants would all form into LLCs. The judges in Delaware were disturbed by the fact that there would be good companies trying to do good things that would get bought out in a hostile takeover. And the judges would, and of course it ends up in litigation, and the judges say, we have to take the side of the hostile acquirer because it is the charter of the company is to maximize the shareholders' interest. And the only interest that we know that the shareholders have in common is a financial interest. And so many good companies got eaten up, and in my own area, oftentimes their R&D was zeroed out and they were just milked for maximum profits. Some of those companies have now seriously crashed and burned, like Valiant is a somewhat famous example. So these Delaware judges talked to the legislature and they said, let's create a new type of company that co-equal is the profit motivation and doing a public benefit. And we will call these PBCs, public benefit corporations, and a few other states have adopted similar things. So a lot of the people joining our company, they say, we want to work at United Therapeutics because of the public benefits. And because our public benefit is creating an unlimited supply of transplantable organs. So everybody has to have their public benefit. It's got to be reported on each year to the shareholders, the state of Delaware. So it's a legitimate thing. And I think the next big phase that we're going to see is people using social media tools, corporate tools, to get everybody in society that are now in so many ways disconnected, more connected and working for the common good. Just one last point on this. There's a word I learned in college called anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E. And what it means is a sense of kind of disconnectedness in society. We live a pretty good material quality of life in the U.S. It could be definitely better for more people, but more or less it's a pretty good material way of life. Our healthcare situation is good. It could be better, and it's improving. But when we read about things like, the Las Vegas shooter and the random sorts of violence that goes on, the disaffected middle parts of the country that they feel, left out, that's a sign that there's socially something that's amiss. And I think that social thing that's amiss is encompassed by this word anomie, disconnectedness. Half century ago, Alvin Toffler, the author of a very famous book called Future Shock, which is still very readable and good, said he predicted that as technology advanced more and more quickly, people would feel disconnected from it. Those who were left behind would feel disconnected from those who had to have, the latest smartphone all the time. And he recommended that society adopt nonprofit mechanisms, public benefit mechanisms, so that all citizens in the country could connect with each other and almost be kind of like an internal Peace Corps type of thing. I think this rising generation is going to rise to that challenge. And I believe the biggest, most exciting things for us are going to be innovations in the social sphere. We're already seeing it with social media, with social finance, you and I were talking about earlier. And I think using technology to connect everybody in America to each other in a meaningful way so we all feel cared about, that's the next frontier.
Thomas Friedman recently wrote a book, Thank You for Being Late, which seems to dovetail a little bit into that construct. And one of the points that he raises early on in the book, in his thesis, is this notion that social systems, government systems, aren't built, because of that issue of organizing people, aren't really built to deal with the more exponential rise of technology. So would you say that our social systems are going to have to sort of graft onto this frontier that you just spoke about?
You have it exactly right, Richard. And I think that that's the next frontier. And I think that there will be ways to create value in that will be identified by so many entrepreneurs in the country. I think that, people like Mark Zuckerberg deserve a huge amount of credit because they saw that there was a lot of disconnectedness. Now, a Facebook profile is not the solution to all the problems, but it's a beginning. And even systems like Uber, I think that they're a beginning. They give us a glimpse of the power of technology to connect everybody to each other. But I think AI will also have to be a very big part of that, because there'll have to be an organization where people ultimately are brought together face to face. The app like Meetup, which is a little bit dated at this point, had the right idea. We need to use technology to bring people together face to face, because there's no substitute for face to face. We all could be in a gazillion web meetings, and it wouldn't have the impact of this face-to-face meeting here. So I think when I say social, I mean really face-to-face, and using technology to enable more face-to-face caring about people throughout America. That, to me, is the job of this generation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Questions from the audience? Okay.
Hi.
Paula Rothenberg, Hope Connections for Cancer Support. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for the work you do. In my world, the news of the possibility of organ regeneration is profound. I mean, it's giving great hope to people who are at the end of their lives. You talked about disconnects, though. We're blessed in this community to have fabulous hospitals. And I know that the people living here will be among the first to be able to benefit from the work you do. What about Middle America, and what will United Therapeutics do to help make sure that people who don't have what we have here have access to the same good medicine?
Thank you. It's a great question, and certainly probably the number one question in the healthcare industry in general is how can we make healthcare affordable for everybody? It's no coincidence that it was called the Affordable Care Act. So, that's foremost in everybody's minds. I'm going to give you my personal opinion, and certainly I'm always listening on this topic because there's a lot to learn. My personal opinion is that technology democratizes, meaning that it automatically makes more things accessible to more people than any other type of top-down policy agenda type of approach. So I'll give you an example in our own company. We adopted a program at the beginning of this year where all patients that are enrolled in all of our clinical trials have their genomes completely sequenced at the beginning of the clinical trial. And we do that in partnership with a company in California called Human Longevity, Inc., which was formed by Craig Venter, who got his start right in Doug Duncan's Montgomery County in Rockville. And he's known as the person who decoded the human genome. So he went on to form, at the first human genome, cost billions of dollars to decode. Now, Craig Ventner decodes people's genomes for $1,000 a person. And he predicts it's going to go down to $100 a person. So this is one example of the democratizing. Now, what we're doing at United Therapeutics, we see in our trials, as with all the cancer drug trials and every other trials, some patients respond to your medicine, some don't. Right now, we're like pretty much complete idiots about who will respond, who won't. Some patients have more side effects, some patients have less side effects. We're pretty much idiots about it. So as a result, we do very large trials that take, hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars, many, many years to complete because it's such a large clinical trial, so that we can get a statistical difference between the patients who respond to our medicine and the ones that don't. Then that's put in the package that the FDA approves. They say, okay, if you're diagnosed with this disease, this medicine is approved to treat your disease. So doctors then prescribe the medicine for everyone with the disease. It's not going to work for everyone with the disease. That's why there had to be such a huge clinical trial in the first place. So there's people that it doesn't work for. One, the healthcare system is wasting money paying for the medicine or the treatment for those patients who it's not going to work for. To me, more tragic is that the patients are wasting their lives, which oftentimes is already foreshortened, on a drug that's not going to work for them or that they're going to have the worst side effects from. So what we're starting to do is, at United Therapeutics, we want to be the first company to have really mastered what we call pharmacogenomics, which means that the medicine matches your genome, the pharmaceutical matches your genome. So we sequence 100%. If you want to enter our clinical trial, you sign a consent form that your genome is sequenced. We randomize the information. I mean, we can't see the person's name. We're not interested in looking at the person's name. Then we match up everybody's genetic markers with the outcomes of the clinical trial. So we know exactly the patients who benefited the most from the drug. We know what their genetic markers are. The ones who had the worst side effects, we know what their markers are. Then we will submit to the FDA that information. That's part of the honesty. We're going to say this medicine works best for people with these genetic markers. It gives the worst side effects to people with these genetic markers, and it doesn't work at all for people with these others. So that will shrink the total number of people for whom our medicine will be prescribed for, because flash forward 5 years from now, at least in this area, your doctors will have your genome sequenced and accessible on the cloud, and they'll have our information, and they'll know, okay, Mary Smith, this medicine works great for you, or this other medicine doesn't work great for you. But the healthcare system will save tons of money. I mean, I think they'll save about 80% of the money. I think about 80% of the drugs that are prescribed are not the right drug for the patient. So they're going to save tons of money. The patients will do better. And then people have said to me, well, Martine, your shareholders will be upset because your revenues are going to be less. You're not selling your medicine to people who can't benefit from it. My first response is, I don't want money from people who are not benefiting from my medicine. That's just wrong. Secondly, I said, I think if we're the company who have cracked the nut on pharmacogenomics and have figured out how to get drugs working for the people that they work best for, first of all of our future trials can now be much, much smaller, because we will only enroll the patients that we know that they're likely to respond to the drug. So the placebo group will definitely not respond. The active group definitely will. Our clinical trials will be much smaller. Our timeframes will be much smaller. Our pipeline can then churn out many more drugs. Other companies will all want to do what we're doing. So I believe by doing the right thing, we will end up doing the very good thing for the shareholders.
Thank you so much for being here. This is such a privilege for everyone in the room.
Oh, thanks.
And I just want to follow on to what you were just saying. So if you follow that model, which I totally respect, I do feel like we're too motivated on profit and shareholder value and not on the public benefit. So I really respect that you're bringing that to light. But in that model, United Therapeutics becomes a target by for-profit corporations because they see the technology, they see the value, they see the profit motive, and they acquire you. How do you fight that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's more a question for kind of like corporate defense people, but I'll go back to the public benefit company. If the judges who worked with the Delaware legislature to get this form of corporation passed, the reason they did it is so when the board of directors says, we're going to say no to this offer, even though it's 30% above our share price, because we have not seen evidence that this hostile acquirer has the same commitment to create an unlimited supply of transplantable organs. What has this hostile acquirer done to create even an increased supply of transplantable organs? United Therapeutics has already increased the supply of transplantable organs. I don't want to waste a lot of your time, but I don't know if you guys could read about it, it's online stuff. We take organs that are not acceptable for transplant, donated today, and we, in essence, refurbish them in very rapid, in a 4-hour period, and about half of those organs have then gone on to be transplanted. So you're not going to find some, you're not going to find some evil acquirer company that's going to be able to even have the bona fides to say we are. So our board will be able to say no. We will not accept that 30% premium. If that company runs to the Delaware courts, they already know that now, and we have a defense. Our defense is that the acquirer has only the financial half in mind, does not have the public benefit. So that public benefit corporation is I think a very strong defense against hostile acquisition.
But you just have to be sure to pick your board members with that.
That is true. That is very true, and we're blessed so far. We have 2 heads of Health and Human Services, Honorable Lewis Sullivan, Honorable Tommy Thompson. So we have 2 people who, the head of HHS, that's like the biggest budget I think it's equal to the Pentagon or maybe even bigger. So those guys are awesome. They've been with us for over a decade. We have 2 absolutely public interest focused people. Dean Catherine Klein. She's the dean of the Wharton School of Business and their diversity initiatives there. She's just an amazing individual at understanding how to dovetail the public interest with the private interest. And Dean Judy Olian, she's the dean of my alma mater, Anderson School of Business at UCLA, and has a very active blog. I'd encourage you to sign on to her blog, where she regularly documents that by doing the right thing and the good thing, you can also do the profitable thing.
Dr. Rothblatt, you've spoken a lot about being on the cutting edge of technology in your past, and I have a question for Martine Rothblatt, the woman. Where do you stand on the lying scale, personally, in terms of technology? You know, in terms of privacy information, do you use a thumbprint on your phone? What's your sense of where data is right now?
Yeah, thank you for the personal question. Those are more fun. It won't surprise anybody, I'm sure, to understand that I'm on the extreme geek scale, geek side of the scale. I've within the past couple years, I've confessed to, I think, an addiction, which is I am addicted to smartphones. And so I have to admit that, I have both iOS and Android smartphones. And I have to admit that that even within the Android sphere, that when there was, for example, a Moto, that brand, that you were able to put like a Hasselblad camera, snap it on the back of your phone, which is the same camera that went to the moon. I mean, it's like an awesome company. Or you can take that off and you can put a projector that gives you like a high def resolution of any picture against the wall, look just as good as that picture. So every place becomes a movie. You just snap it off and you don't even have to, it's easy. So then I had to, get the Moto. And then the Pixel came out, so I had to get the Pixel 2. And so on and so forth with tablets and everything. So it's a little bit ridiculous, me and chargers. So that's an addiction I have, and I really better get it under control. In terms of personal data and stuff like that, I do have fingerprint and face scan on whichever devices enable that. Although I tend to bypass it and just use a code, because it's just higher probability of working the first time and not having to the finger didn't fit quite right. So I'm more of a code person, and I like. One thing I like a lot more about Google Android phones is I could do a swipe code. I'm definitely a swiper more than a typer. And so I was glad when Swipe came over to the iOS, because then I could swipe on the iOS, and I've been swiping for years on Android. On data and cloud, that is a question I'm on the knife edge on. I believe so much in connecting people that I want to share my data and share my location and share. On the other hand, because I would say I'm a minor public figure, the people who I know love me and look out for me, they're saying, Martine, you really don't want everybody to know where you are all the time. So I would say I'm a very, I would say in general, I'm like a modest poster, modest social media profile person. And there would be, maybe my kids might be 10x me, okay? So on the other hand, I'm like 100x my mom.
So, you know,
Got it.
hope that helps.
Update, was a question now?
I have a question about mistakes. And so the question is, how have you handled some of the more significant mistakes you've made in your life? And also, and from a leadership standpoint, the mistakes the folks who work for you have handled.
Yeah, that's a really deep question, Stephen. One, thank you for everything that the NIH does. NIH has been absolutely intrinsic to our success at United Therapeutics. You find the NIH DNA through all of the drugs that we've developed and the diseases that we treat. So thank you on behalf of your whole organization. It's, you know, discussion of mistakes is a very tricky subject because I'm always, remember this thing that I learned in history that when Germany lost the First World War and France kind of lost it too because the US kind of came in and saved the day for everybody, the French said, oh, we made a horrible mistake having like an open border with Germany. So we're going to build this like Maginot line of like fixed artilleries all along the French-German border, and we won't repeat the same mistake. And of course, like the Germans just went around it and over it, and the French lost again. So you've got to be really careful in analyzing mistakes and make sure that you're not always fighting the last war and drawing the wrong lesson from mistakes. I personally believe my biggest personal mistake is that I'm too trusting in people. Because I have been burned in that trust multiple times. And I think that when people say to me, Martine, I'm completely loyal to this organization, I'm going to spend my entire career here, I would like to have more responsibility and authority. And then, you know, again, you have to draw the right lesson, not all the time, not half the time, maybe it's just like 5% of the time. Those individuals, you know, would then leave somewhere else, go somewhere else, and I have to like kind of clean up the mess after they've left. Then I say, geez, I trusted that person. They looked me like right in the eye and said like, you know, they love this company, they were totally loyal to it, they loved their project, this was just a great authority. So what lesson do you draw from that? Do you stop trusting people? No, that would be stupid. You have to keep perspective that most mistakes are things that happen a small fraction of the time. And you have to keep that in perspective and say, hey, if I'm going to do something in the world, some percentage of the time it's not going to work out. And if I'm going to try to avoid that percentage of the time that doesn't work out, I'm also going to avoid all the times things did work out, and that would be the bigger mistake. So probably in summary, I would say be aware of your mistakes, reflect on them, but be very careful about not throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
One more, one here. Oh, I'm sorry, okay, go ahead.
So I really appreciate, like everyone here, you being with us today. And I hear this word leadership as I've got a 16-year-old or a 13-year-old. And I hear the things that you talk about, honesty, fortitude. What is your opinion of educational systems here in the United States, and how do we grow the next Martine? Is it through those virtues that you gave earlier? Or is there something else that will have the next entrepreneur, the innovator? What are the keys you think about the educational system that will drive those next leaders?
Yeah, thanks for that nice compliment and question. I'm a huge believer in education. I am a bibliophile, and that's something I don't even call an addiction because I think it's just so good. So you've got to inculcate a love of reading. I am who I am, mostly because of what I read. I read of people who came before me as transgender pioneers. And if I had not read those stories, I wouldn't have had the courage to be who I am. I've read the stories of people who came before me as technological pioneers. And if I had not read about their trials and tribulations and how they succeeded, I wouldn't have had the courage to, and the ways of thinking to be who I am. So it's really, really important to inculcate a love of reading. It's super important, I believe, to also inculcate a love of writing. It's through writing, if you read things like can very easily just like go in one eye and out the other. But when you write about what you read, you begin to connect what you've read to everything else in your mind. And I don't think it's a good idea to like stop teaching kids to write cursive. I think that that's like super, super important. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, it doesn't take much. It's not like we're so busy, we don't have time to like learn to write cursive. So I think it's, and this is, you know, going to seem to you like I'm going down the R's, but arithmetic is super, super important. And I am who I am pretty much because of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Every technology advance I've done, from Sirius XM to creating the first electric helicopter that we'll end up using for delivering organs, for doing the math with regard to the binding affinity of our medicines, to the molecules that they're binding to, have all involved me doing calculations. And you don't have to, you know, you don't have to take 4 years of math in college, but, you know, I mean, certainly basic arithmetic skills. Algebra absolutely is essential. Algebra is just deducing the unknown from the known. I mean, what could be more cool than that? And, you know, trigonometry and geometry are really just other forms of algebra. I think that I was a child of public schools. I wouldn't say that they were like the greatest schools. I grew up in Los Angeles County public school system. A colleague, we were talking about Fairfax High School there in Los Angeles, and University of California. But the best thing that I learned from all of those schools was to read, to write, and arithmetic. And from there, I have learned everything else that I needed to know. So I really, really believe in education. I think that President Obama was like right on when he was saying that the most important thing to ensure American competitiveness in the 21st century is our emphasis on education. The brain is the one resource it's the only resource that the more you exploit it, the more you get. It never runs out. Not like oil, not like anything else. The more you exploit, the more you get. Each one of us has a supercomputer more valuable than any computer that Google could ever have. It's right here. And I think future generations are going to be abhorred at how much mental ability we have wasted in our life and times. And they would say, oh my God, there were all these beautiful people and they were never taught music and art and taken advantage of all of their abilities. Their lives were just allowed to waste. And people in the future will feel as tragic about that as we do, thinking, oh my God, these people 200 years ago, they had to sit there and just like, you know, pick cotton for, 16 hours a day, or just go behind a mule or do mind-numbing work in some factory sewing something. I mean, we feel their lives were wasted, right? And so if you leave here with anything, it's, I think our highest priority as a society should be education.
One over here.
Thank you so much for everything you shared with us today, and with such an open heart. It seems like there's a common thread throughout everything you've done of vision. And I'm wondering where that started or what your vision was as a child or whatever, and then how that evolved over time and what your vision is now.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's almost impossible to really know. I don't think my childhood was spectacularly unique. We did have, like a share of family tragedies. First, my mom was in a horrible car accident. The doctor told her she'd never walk again. She did walk, and she's alive today. And then 2 years later, my dad got in a horrible car accident, and he couldn't walk after that. And one of the biggest pleasures I've had in my life at United Therapeutics is we lived in San Diego. He was a dentist, and he couldn't get out of bed, so we went bankrupt. And he started learning himself accounting because he was trying to figure out how am I going to support the family. My mom was a speech therapist, and finally his doctor said, well, I heard there's a new medical procedure at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester that we can air ambulance you there, and hopefully they can do something for you. So in fact, way back in the day, they air ambulanced him, and he was in fact cured at the Mayo Clinic. And eventually went back to practicing dentistry, became like an amateur bowler and a long distance walker, and all kind of medical miracles. And I had the opportunity to go to the Mayo Clinic, which is our partner in organ transplantation, and go to it's no longer their waiting room, but I went to the waiting room where he went. It was kind of like a spiritual experience. So I probably got brought up with this belief that technology is a really good thing, and that technology can solve some of the injustices of life. Because I had the experience with my mom and with my dad. So that probably was the formative experience for me to become a technologist. And when I cross a border or something, and like a geographic border, and the customs people always say to you, like, what's your profession? I claim to be a technologist. Now I claim to be a biotechnologist. And it has its downsides. You have to keep track of like a dozen different kind of chargers. But I think it has a lot of great sides. And I'll conclude by saying that you don't have to have a big impact on people's lives. It doesn't have to be in medical technology. To this day, I get more people coming up to me saying thank you and wanting to give me a hug for bringing serious radio to their lives than for medicines. But it's important, because if like you're stuck in traffic for 2 hours and you go through a depression, that's going to mess up your whole body systems. How your mind is how your body is, right? And if you're listening to something on NPR or whatever, and you get like, wow, that's a new idea, that can give you a spark of insight and change your whole life. So communication, of which education is part, is probably the most important medicine of all.
Hi, thank you for coming. First of all, thank you for Sirius Radio. It saved me a long drive across parts of the country.
Thank you for your subscription.
My name is David Benach. I'm an immigration lawyer in town. You talked about LGBTQ diversity. I wanted to ask you about a different kind of diversity, and that's immigrants. In the science field, medical field, it's well known that immigrants have always been an agent of change, and so many people who have given a lot to our leadership in that area. And I'm wondering now, as we see more and more foreign students avoiding the United States for graduate study, I wonder what you think about the importance of immigrants as part of diversity in your businesses.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and more than that, thank you for your work. I would say immigration lawyers are, it's hard to rank these things, but to me, like more important even than nurses, and I love nurses, I worship nurses, but immigration lawyers, you are doing the Lord's work, so thank you so much. Obviously, I'm like completely pro-immigration, and I am a grandchild of immigrants, I never forget that. Both my grandfathers and grandmothers escaped from Russia, came here, didn't know a word of English, and through a couple generations have allowed me to have a great life. So I claim myself, one of my identities I claim is as an immigrant, and I don't do that with any disrespect to people who are what I would call real immigrants, but I'm totally on the immigrant side. I think it is probably the single most self-defeating policy that the U.S. has to limit immigration. The people, first of all, if I just forget about human rights and morality, if I just look at it as a pure scientist, okay, from a Darwinian perspective, the people who are going to have the gumption to get up and leave an environment which is 100% comfortable to them, the only environment that they've ever known, travel thousands of miles to go to an alien land where they're not going to look like, talk like, and have equal citizenship status. The amount of gumption that takes is actually beyond my comprehension, which is why I'm like so in awe of my grandparents, because that's how much gumption it took for them. Who would, from a Darwinian process, who would not want those people in your country? I mean, those are like the most awesome people on the face of the earth. And I wrote a book about 10 years ago or so called 2 Stars for Peace. And it was a solution to this ever intractable problem of Middle East peace. In any event, one of the ideas I proposed in the book was that Israel and Palestine should be admitted as the 51st and 52nd state, at least invited to be, if they want to join. And there was a whole chapter reply to the critics on immigration, because what that would mean is that there was like instantly, 10 million or 12 million, whatever the number is, new immigrants into the United States. And in that book, I also felt that all Palestinians should have a right of return, and they would be returning as American citizens in a state of Palestine, free to go to any of the other states. So in that book, which you can get on Amazon and whatnot, I give all of the reason why all of those people would be such a surge to the productivity and the richness of America. And I countered the fact like, well, how about the people who say that some terrorists, will come in, those, 10 million, 15 million Palestinians and Israelis running it. I said, that is like the most stupid argument I could think of, because anybody who is a terrorist and is going to sit there and plot a terrorist plot, we've got like 3,000-mile border with Canada, 2,000-mile border with Mexico, countless coastlines. Anybody who wants to come into the United States is going to find a way to come into the United States. And so to block out 99.9999% of good people that are going to grow your country's cultural, economic, and every other kind of wealth for fear of a very few number of people is the epitome of irrationality and illogic. So if I haven't been clear, it's I am finally, I believe even if you guys will just permit me to just talk a little bit about in the realm of faith for a moment. This is a world that we borrow from our children and our grandchildren. It's not ours to take away from them. And it was passed down to us by our ancestors. Our ancestors suffered a lot. You look back in time at how our ancestors lived, they suffered a lot. And the main thing that they had to look forward to is that maybe our children or grandchildren will live a better life, okay? And if you take that all the way back, there were no borders, there were no lines in the sand. as humans evolved on this earth. And so I understand that it's hard to organize billions of people. Having nation states makes it easier to organize billions of people. That's all fine and good. But to take those borders and turn them into boundaries is, I think, an act against morality and the morality of the human species.
I'm going to end on that one. Dr. Rothblatt, thank you very much. Thank you for being very interested. Thank you again. Another round of applause for Dr. Rothblatt.